Hello, everyone. My name is Stanley St. Rose, and today we're going to be talking about the novel The Picture of Dorian Gray, written by Oscar Wilde. Now, before we go into the summary and explanation and analysis of this novel, please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and/or comment so that the channel can continue to reach more people. So, this novel is very interesting. If you guys have ever seen any Disney movies or any movies that aired on Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon when you were growing up or when you were a kid. This novel, for me, from my perspective, I think it has a lot to do with those because Dorian Gray is the main character of the novel, but throughout the novel, there's two people that kind of like stand on his shoulders, just like how you can see in some um, childish programming or some or children programming. Sometimes you see like an evil consciousness or conscience would pop up on a shoulder, and a good conscience would pop up on another shoulder, and they would like help the main character decide between right and wrong. I think the life of Dorian Gray, it kind of does the same thing, or the same thing happens to Dorian Gray within this novel. Because in the novel, Dorian Gray has these two individuals, these two so and so friends of his by the names of Basil and Lord Henry Wotton. Basil is this painter. He's a great painter. He's an individual that loves life, or that loves the good things in life. He wants himself. He has ideals of what life should be like and what people should do in life. He loves beauty. He loves to capture beauty as a painter. Basil Howard is just an individual that in a way, I think you can find some evidence in the novel to say that he kind of represents goodness or righteousness or good behavior. And the other character, Lord Henry Wotton, he's more of an individual that kind of represents hedonism. He represents just having a good time or indulging in things that people don't usually partake in, such as sexual acts or deviant acts, things that the majority of people wouldn't be partaking in or wouldn't be doing. Lord Henry Wotton is kind of like that individual within this novel. So they both try to kind of put their ideals on Dorian Gray, or they both try to share their philosophies of life with Dorian Gray. And throughout the novel, you kind of see which side Dorian chooses and what he becomes and what happens to him. So a big tie-in in the novel is a big thing that is very important within the novel is the picture of Dorian Gray. Basil paints a picture or a painting of Dorian Gray. It's a very beautiful painting. Dorian is this young individual. He has money. He has a good reputation. He looks good. Women want him. Everybody want him because he's handsome. He looks good. He has money. He has everything that you would need to live a successful life. And so in the beginning of a novel, Dorian Gray just say, I wish that I could that I wouldn't grow old and that the picture would grow old in my place. So he kind of looks at this picture of him, this young, like he sees himself as a young man, as a young individual, and he sees that I don't really want to lose this beauty, this wealth, this all that I have due to myself getting older or aging. I wish I could stay young forever, and this picture would take my place. And in the novel, in a way, that kind of happens. And pretty much when we talk about what happens in the rest of the novel, you guys will figure that out, and you'll see why what he wishes for in another way comes true. So the novel goes forward. Dorian Gray, he gets involved with this actress by the name of Sybil Vane. She's this actress. She's performing in plays. She's very good. And this during this one night, Dorian goes and sees one of her plays, and she's just for him. She is just amazing. He watches this play, and this play is just wonderful. Her acting is just it just blows him away. He just can't believe that this woman can act this well. And so, right then and there, he decides, man, I have to marry this woman. I have to be with this woman for the rest of my life. And so, he proposes to her. She's happy because Sybil Vane is this individual from she's poor, she's not wealthy. For her, acting is kind of like an escape from her life and what happened, what she goes through in her life. So acting was kind of like that escape that she had, that she threw her entire self, her entire being into acting because it was her escape. And when Dorian Gray proposed to her, she didn't have that same passion towards acting anymore because now she felt like she had a future because Dorian Gray comes into her life. He has wealth, he's handsome, he looks good. For a woman that's in her circumstance, being with Dorian Gray would just be, that's her Prince Charming basically. So they're happy. Dorian Gray is happy. Sybil Vane is happy. So during one of her plays, Dorian invites Lord Henry Wotton and Basil to come see her, and she's terrible. She like the whole play is just horrible. It's terrible. Her acting skills just seem to just disappear or just evaporated, and the play is just extremely bad. And Lord Henry Wotton and Basil, they're just not impressed. And right after this play, Dorian just breaks off the engagement. He's like extremely mad. He's like, I loved you for your acting. I loved you for what you could do on the stage. How dare you embarrass me in front of my friends like this? How dare you do this to me? And so this whole thing it just breaks off. The engagement breaks off, and they go their separate ways. And what sadly happens, Sybil Vane ends up committing suicide. She takes poison, and she dies. So this kind of like impacts Dorian Gray's conscience. It impacts how him. It doesn't like send him into this depression, but it does impact him because he's like, oh my god, because of what I did, because of my impact on her, she committed suicide. So he walks away from that. He tries to ignore it. He tries to just leave that all behind him. So life another way just goes back to normal for him. He's a bachelor. He has wealth, money. He looks good. So he just goes back to his normal life, and Sybil Vane is dead. Um, what begins to happen throughout the novel while these acts are happening and Dorian Gray is acting like this, and the more and more he's practicing hedonism, and the more and more he's indulging in all types of things of pleasure, the more the portrait of him, the painting of him, starts to deteriorate, and he doesn't like this. He doesn't like the fact that this painting of him is starting to get wrinkles. It's starting to look hellish. There's a point in the novel where this thing just starts to look like a devilish being because it's just starting to reflect who he is. It's starting to reflect his soul as a human being because Dorian Gray becomes an individual that only cares about himself and his wishes in the novel, and the painting starts to reflect that. And every time Dorian looks at the painting, he doesn't like it. He doesn't like that he's being reflected or his inner self is being reflected in the painting. Um, the next big thing that happens in the novel is that Basil comes to visit Dorian, and after seeing the picture or the portrait, Basil is just shocked. He's like, oh my god, this is just completely. I don't know what happened to my painting. This is horrible. This was a beautiful portrait, a breathtaking portrait, and now it just looks ugly. And you know, Basil is just shocked, and with a fit of anger, from his anger, Dorian just kills Basil. And then he covers up he covers up the murder. There's this scientist. He blackmails this doctor. He blackmails into um, covering up the murder, disposing the body, and he just Dorian just like hides this murder of this painter, and he goes on living his life, and the job is done. The body is disposed. He killed this man, and um, Dorian just goes on living his life, and the portrait just keeps reflecting who he is internally. His actions have caused two people to die now. Sybil Vane, she committed suicide, and now he killed Basil. So his soul is just slowly and slowly becoming something that's rotten, and it's becoming worse. So the novel goes on. An individual that comes into the scene that wants to kill Dorian is Sybil Vane's brother, James Vane. He comes into the scene, and after hearing what this man by the name of Dorian Gray did to his sister, he goes after Dorian Gray, but Dorian kind of like escapes James because he shows James's face, and James is like, "Oh, you're too young to be the man who pushed my sister, compelled my sister to commit suicide." So he kind of gets away from that. Later, James he figures this out. He tries to come back um, to kill Dorian, but he gets shot in a hunting accident when he was like hiding and he was hiding, and they mistake him for an animal, and he gets killed. So everything in of a way with throughout the novel goes well for Dorian. His killer gets killed. He hides a murder. Um, like externally, um, things are not perfect, but he's getting away with a lot of things. He's doing what he wants. He's indulging in things that he shouldn't really be indulging in. So externally, he's getting away with a lot of things, but internally, the painting is bothering him. His conscience is bothering him. And when Dorian reaches a place at the end of the novel where he can't deal with this anymore, he locks himself in this room in his house with the portrait, and he's looking at it. He's looking at like he's thinking. He's looking at himself, and then at the end of the novel, there's this big scream that is heard. His servants can't get into the room that he's in with the portrait. They end up going through the window to find him in the portrait that looks younger. At the end of the novel, the portrait just it doesn't look like a hellish being anymore. It looks beautiful. It looks breathtaking. It looks younger again. But they find a knife in Dorian Gray, and his body is withered. His body is old, and they can only tell that he is Dorian Gray because of the rings that are on his hand. So that's pretty much how the novel ends. It's not really, um, it's not an ending where you see the main character um, become a better individual. You don't see any redemption. You don't see any, um, um, you know, he indulges in hedonism. He indulges in the pleasures of life, and when he couldn't clear all the blemishes off of himself, off of his life. He tried to get rid of the thing that really reminded him of all the bad things that he did in his life, and that backfired, and he ends up dying for it. So this novel is quite interesting about Dorian Gray in terms of analysis. If we go into the analysis part of this summary now, there's a lot that can be learned through the story of Dorian Gray. I think that the number one thing is just how he Dorian Gray was heavily influenced by Lord Henry Wotton and Basil Hallward. Um, it seems as if he didn't really think for himself. I think that going back to the idea that I presented to you guys about the kind of like that Disney um, conscience on shoulders concept, where you see like a devilish figure on one shoulder and a heaven like figure on the other shoulder, and they try to like help the main character or the protagonist kind of figure out what to do, whether to go on a right direction or on on a horrible direction. And I feel like Lord Henry Wotton and Basil Howard kind of play that position within this novel, and I Dorian Gray ends up choosing the path of Lord Henry Wotton because he doesn't really focus on beauty or on the ideals of Basil. He really just goes into focusing on the pleasures of life and how to indulge in life, and that really brought him calamity. That really brought him to a place that he couldn't get the portrait out of his head. He couldn't get the fact that his soul was being represented in this portrait out of his head, and that just led him to his own death. So that's an important part you can take from the novel. That's an important um, detail you can get from this novel by analyzing it. There's a lot that I can say about the individual characters. Sybil Vane is an interesting character because I think that she was too naive. I know that her life wasn't easy and that her life wasn't perfect, but the fact that um, she based her happiness on um, Dorian after she only met him um, after a play was just ridiculous, because you can't just base your life after meeting somebody for a play. So her life was wasted, but I think that you have to put a little bit of the blame on how her decision to fall in love with Dorian and to lose herself in Dorian that quickly, that's not wise. So very interesting novel. There's a lot here. There's a lot to be said about the main characters and the supporting characters. But that is my summary and analysis of the novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Remember to please leave a like, subscribe, and or comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video.